think I smell a rat. Oh, I think I smell a rat. Oh, you little kids seem to think you know just where it's at. Oh, I think I smell a rat.
Classical conditioning is another word for learning. Classical conditioning is a process of learning that happens when two stimuli are paired and create a response that was originally elicited at the first stimulus, but is now elicited by the second stimulus alone. An example of this is when we pair the clicker with food by pressing the button then presenting the food to Georgi, our rat. Georgi was classically conditioned to become easily excited by the clicker after learning that the sound equaled food. Operant conditioning is also a type of learning, but is different from classical conditioning because it involves voluntary choices. Through operant conditioning, an individual learns to change certain behavior because the consequences of that behavior. The consequence may either be positive or negative. An example of this is when Georgi is shown here making a choice to jump out of the tank because he knows he will be rewarded with food. Shaping is a method used in reinforcement of successive approximations or step-by-step processing. An example of this is when we use shaping to teach Georgi how to be a basketball star. By first teaching him how to first touch, then move, then pick up, and finally dunk the ball in hoop.
Good. That's it, Georgie. Now you're playing basketball.
They're playing basketball
all around the world.
Chaining is another method used in reinforcement, but instead of step-by-step processing, this process is of linking together already known behaviors. An example is when Georgi learned how to complete an obstacle course using the chaining technique very easily because he had previously learned each trick before linking them all together. Acquisition is when an individual first associates a neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus and the conditioned stimulus is learned. An example of this is when Georgi uses acquisition when he first realizes that the clicker means he's going to get food and becomes excited by it. Positive punishment is when we add a stimulus in order to decrease an unwanted behavior. An example of this is when we tap Georgi on the nose or butt when he was cleaning himself during training.
Right on the floor.
Stop. Georgi, stop.
Come on, Georgie.
A primary reinforcer is a stimulus that an organism is born to react or care about. Example of this is Georgi is biologically wired to be motivated by food.
Keep going, Georgie. Yes, that's 2. Come on, you gotta do 5. 3, 4. One more, honey. Oh, he might have got it. Look on the bottom, Violet. It tells us what number. How many hits?
It's at 5.
Yep, so he got one. He inhaled the first one that fell.
Associative learning is learning that two events, two stimuli, in classical conditioning occur together. An example of this is when Georgi learned that a click from the clicker meant food was coming his way.
Georgie.
Pay attention.
This is with food. Yes, Georgie. Yes. Delicious, isn't it? What are you eating today on Violet's birthday?
Pops.
Pop cereal.
Cognitive maps are mental representations of layouts of one's environment. An example of this is once Georgi finishes going through the maze, he will show that he has made a cognitive map of the maze by re-going through the maze but backwards from finish to start.
Come on, Georgie. Make it a good one.
Good one, right, Georgie?
What are you crunching on?
He loves these little things. Yes, you ready? No. Come back. Come here. Come here. Ready?
Latent learning is learning that occurs but is not apparent until the incentive is to demonstrate it. An example of this is when Georgi learned to correctly run through the maze backwards, even though we did not teach him to go through the maze backwards. Generalization is when an individual responds to similar conditioned stimuli in the same way. An example of this is when Georgie shows generalization by behaving in the same manner towards any gloved hands. Negative reinforcement is taking away an unwanted stimulus to make more of a wanted behavior. An example of this is when we tapped Georgie's butt as he went through the maze until he did what we wanted him to do, which was go through the maze. Positive reinforcement is adding a stimulus to increase wanted results in an individual. An example of this is when we gave Georgie a treat after he completed the maze, so that way he would keep doing the correct motions. Negative punishment is taking away a stimulus to decrease an unwanted behavior. An example of this is when we took away objects like the ball when Georgie was distracted and could not listen to us. A secondary reinforcer is a stimulus that an individual learns to care about. An example of this is when Georgie learns to love running on his wheel, so we use that as motivation for him. Conditioned stimulus is an item, object, event, or word that an individual learns to have a reflex or emotion towards. An example of this is the sound of the clicker, our voices, or our scents that cause an automatic reaction in Georgie. A conditioned response is the learned reflex or emotion. An example of this is when Georgie learned to automatically respond to hearing the clicker. Delay conditioning is the neutral stimulus that occurs before the unconditioned stimulus with a brief overlap between the two. An example of this is when we click the clicker while giving Georgie a snack and continuing to click the clicker while he was eating the snack. Trace conditioning is a neutral stimulus that is presented and then disappears before the unconditioned stimulus is presented. An example of this is when we click the clicker then wait a second before giving Georgie a treat. Simultaneous conditioning occurs when the unconditioned stimulus and the neutral stimuli are paired together at the same time. An example of this is when we use this conditioning, we would simultaneously click the clicker and give Georgie a treat. Backwards conditioning is when an unconditioned stimulus precedes the neutral stimulus. An example of this is when we used conditioning, we would give Georgie a treat, then wait a beat to click the clicker. Law of effect is if you leave a reward or pleasant stimulus, and the behavior is more likely to be repeated. An example of this is giving Georgie a treat after he correctly completes a trick, such as jumping out of the tank on command. Extinction is when the unconditioned stimulus is no longer paired with the conditioned stimulus, and the unconditioned response stops. An example of this is when we stopped giving Georgie a treat after clicking the clicker, and he stops doing the learned move. Spontaneous recovery is once the conditioned response stops. It can quickly be reactivated by pairing the conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus again. An example of this is beginning once again to give Georgie a treat after clicking the clicker, then he resumes doing the trick he originally completed. Discrimination is when the organism can tell the difference between two similar conditioned stimuli. An example of this is when Georgie only responds with reflex excitement to a specific pair of hands, specifically ours, not Miss Vita's.
One, two, three, go. He's Georgie. You know what? We're gonna start one last time. Okay, stop getting hyped up on sugar. You're okay. 1, 2, go. Come on, Georgie. Come on, Georgie. Georgie, here. Georgie. Georgie. What is he looking at?
Pepperoni out.
Sorry.
He really likes
sorry,
the
I'm gonna steal it from
pepperonis.
you. You gotta eat it quickly so we can
Let's
do
stick
it.
another pepperoni if that's what he likes. Seriously, pepperoni.
Yeah.
You're Italian, Georgie.
Georgie!
That is a missed shot.
It just rattled.
You're not being a rap basketball star.
What? Okay, Georgie.
Get
They're playing basketball.
All around the
We
world.
love their basketball.
Okay, go.
wrong,
Back. You literally did it twice already. Correctly.
wrong.
Come on.
Wrong. Wrong.
Ready, Georgie? On your mark. Get set. Go.
Excellent.
4.0 seconds.
Wow.